Hello, it's Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and I am shooting from the lug nuts facility where we've got some interesting cars here. They all happen to be convertibles. We've got this 60s Land Rover that we've been working on for a couple of years, a really beautiful 90s E320 Mercedes Cabriolet, a V12 Series 3 E-Type, and at the very end, a 2006 Spiker. And I've done separate videos on some of these cars. For today, I wanted to talk about this Aston Martin V8 Vantage. Now this is a car, not this exact car, but I sold these when they were new in Calgary. And I really think it's not only a terrific car, but a terrific buy at the moment. So for this video, I'll go through a really brief history of Aston Martin, where the Vantage sits in the lineage, how significant it was for the company, what it was like to sell them in the mid to late 2000s, the current market today, and why I think that these V8 Vantages offer a really terrific value for quite an exotic sports car. So I'll turn the camera around and let's go through this 2007 Aston Martin V8 Vantage Roadster. Okay, so there's better sources for the history of Aston Martin than me in the confines of this video, but it's been around for a long time, more than 100 years. Aston Martin would have started in the early teens with Lionel Martin, and I think the Aston was a hill climb. And they would have had a rich competition history and some interesting cars, mostly small displacement cars that took them up into the start of the World War II. And then after World War II, an ad was placed in the London Sunday Times, I understand, for the sale of the company, and Sir David Brown bought it. They had a single car, but they didn't have an engine for it. And David Brown bought the Lagonda company because they had a new twin cam 6, and that twin cam 6 was a W.O. Bentley design that he designed working for Lagonda after his stint at Bentley when Rolls-Royce took over Bentley. Okay, so we had a W.O. Bentley design 2.6 liter straight 6 that went in something called a DB2, and they found immediate success with that. They won Le Mans with Carroll Shelby and I think Roy Salvadori, that spawned the DB series of cars. The next one, the DB3, was a race car. The DB4 was a Superleggera. The first cars were bodied by Tickford, and then they moved to Newport Pagnell, and they built the Superleggera lightweight steel frame with aluminum body under license from the Italian company. Touring. Okay, so that takes us to the early 70s, and then we have the Aston Martin V8. There's Tadek Merrick was an engineer recruited to do the engines on the DB series cars as well, and he came up with a brand new V8 4-cam V8, and then that car soldiered on until the late 80s. It became the Virage. There were a bunch of special editions of the Virage, some twin supercharged. They sold in very small numbers. Like, I think their annual output was down in the hundreds in the mid 90s, and there was just no money to develop a new car. And then they were bought by Ford, and they bought Jaguar and Aston Martin at the same time or nearabouts. And Ian Callum was the design director, and they were now had access to Ford money to come up with a whole batch of new cars. I think the way this went is Ian Callum was originally part of TWR with Peter Stevens, the aerodynamicist and designer, and Tom Walkinshaw. While at TWR, which had a relationship with Jaguar, building the racing cars, and the XJS in the European Touring Championship and the Le Mans cars, TWR designed a new Jaguar under Ian Callum. And this, and it was presented to the Jaguar board and they didn't, for whatever reason, want the car, but Aston Martin said, well, we could use that car for Aston, and so Ian Callum's new Jaguar became an Aston Martin, and that became a DB7, and that then started the design language for the modern Aston Martin. Now the DB7 was still based on the Jaguar XJS, and it had a supercharged Jaguar engine in it. Later, it would get the 6-liter V12, which was 2 Ford V6s joined together. So, but the Ian Callum's DB7, which I think is the car that he's most famous for, started the new look for Aston Martin. Okay, and then in the early 2000s, Henrik Fisker came on board. This was after his stint at BMW, where he designed the BMW Z8. And Henrik Fisker picked up from where Ian Callum left off and then finalized the design of 2 new Aston Martins, the Vantage, V8 Vantage, which you see here, and the DB9. And this, though, the big difference here was this was on a completely new platform. So there was no parts of Jaguar XJS, which dated back to the early 70s, in this car, and it was a completely new platform that they called the VH platform, and it was a bonded and aluminum structure, right up to date, that could be varied in length and width. And this VH structure then spawned the Vantage, the DB9, and later the Rapide. Okay, so to that they added, they kept the V12, and that was 2 Ford V6s, I think, from the Mondio, and they came up with the V8 engine for this car. They differentiated the Vantage and the DB9, with the Vantage being much more of the sports car and the DB9 being the tourer, and the V8 Vantage was lighter, shorter, a little bit more nimble. It had the 4-cam, 32-valve V8 engine, and the 6-speed gearbox, and that was either a 6-speed manual with 3 pedals or a 6-speed automated manual where it was the same gearbox, but the operation was electro-hydraulically controlled via paddles on the steering wheel. So this would have been one of the first automated manual gearboxes, and this car, and they called it a SportShift, which is in this car. For the engine, we have this 4.3-liter V8. We can see that it's very low down in the chassis, and we can see that it's behind the center line of the front axle, making this a front mid-engine car. And then we can see the aluminum structure entirely, including the support for the shocks, etc. Completely aluminum body. And we have the gearbox, which lives in the rear, and a torque tube houses the drive shaft and connects rigidly the engine and the transaxle. So this car is light and stiff with a low center of gravity, and the engine placed and the mechanical components placed within the axles. So it handles really nicely. It has a exhaust with a valve in it that'll open up more or less straight pipes at a certain RPM. So it's got a really nice cracking V8 noise to it. And it is a really wonderful car to drive. It's very nimble. It's pointy on the front end, but not unstable. It changes direction very quickly. You really notice that the chassis is very stiff, and it's a pleasure to drive. Okay, so walking around the car, we've got these doors which swing up as they open. I think they call them swan doors, if I recall my Aston Martin training. And we've got a lovely full leather interior with contrast stitch and nice materials. And this interior is kind of a step beyond what you normally get with cars in, you know, the $100,000 to $200,000 range. It looks more like you know, a Ferrari or something like that that might have a $300,000 price tag. Okay, so these V8 Vantages, when I was selling them in the mid to late 2000s, well, the coupes would have been about 150,000 in Canada, and the Roadsters, you know, maybe 175 out the door. And I guess in the States they would have been, you know, maybe $25,000 less in US dollars. So that would have been about the same price as a 911 Turbo Porsche, and about the same price as an Audi R8. And it was a very competitive car then. I mean, you know, it was certainly a lot nicer, faster than a regular 911 Carrera, and it had a lot more handwork, it had nicer paint, it had a nicer interior, it was a lot more special than the regular Porsches. Even the turbos, I mean, the 500 horsepower turbo four-wheel drive was faster, but the Aston was more involving to drive. And as well with the Audi as well. I mean, the Audi shares a lot of the same you know, design features. It's all aluminum. It has a, you know, 4.2 liter engine with around 400 horsepower. It had a automated manual gearbox like this. It was about the same price. But the Audi was a very refined car, you know, maybe too refined. It looked exotic, but to drive it, it just felt like a sedan. So when we sold these, they were a very, very competitive piece. And we did pretty well. I mean, in Calgary, you know, it's 1 million people. I don't know, they probably sold 50 911s, 40 to 50 911s, maybe only a dozen or so R8s, and we sold about 20 of these per year. So they actually sold quite well. I mean, what happened is Aston didn't really have the resources to continue developing the car, and the rest, and the 911, for instance, I mean, that became the 991 in 2012, and this car wasn't really updated much for 10 years, so it got a little bit outdated, you know, when you got into the early teens. But in 05, 06, 07, 07 was the first year of the Roadster. This was a very competitive car, and if I'm not mistaken, it would have been the year where Aston would have sold the most cars. You know, I think they sold 7,000 cars a year, 7,000 cars in 07, something like that. Ferrari would have been maybe 9,000 cars, but that was a lot more than the 500 cars that they were selling before they had access to Ford resources and could come up with some new models. So anyway, it was well received. It was well reviewed. You know, it got lots of great press, and it sold well. They were reliable cars. You know, I don't remember any significant issues with them, other than they didn't like winter very much in Calgary. You know, so the windows would have trouble, and they didn't really want to start when it got really cold. But I doubt that's a consideration for very many people today. To drive wise, you know, it held its own and then some against the Porsche and the Audi competition. Okay, so I like the car a lot. And where does it stand today? Well, you know, it's tough to buy a 911 right now. The prices are just through the roof. You know, to get a 911 Turbo, it's not under, a nice one, it's not under $100,000 in Canada. To get a nice 997. This one's 50. They started out being the same amount of money, and the 911s were twice as much. So at 50 grand, you know, it's a really compelling buy. The maintenance isn't too bad. It's a fairly straightforward car. You know, it's more than a Porsche or a Mercedes, but it's not in Ferrari or exotic territory by any means. So, you know, the servicing costs aren't bad, and you're unlikely to, the person who buys this car is unlikely to put huge mileage on it anyway. And it's fully depreciated at this point. So with all the other classics kind of skyrocketing in value, I mean, there's Honda Civics that sell for $30,000 or $40,000 US, you know, it's crazy. But the Aston Martins from this vintage, you know, haven't rid that wave. So you can get, you know, an all aluminum car, dry sumped, front mount, front mid-engine design, something with, you know, as much performance as you could ever really need on the road, something that's exotic, comfortable, beautifully trimmed, and you can buy that for $50,000. That is a tremendous value, you know, a tremendous value in my opinion. I mean, some of the cars that go for, you know, that it seem really cheap or cheap for a reason. Either the people are scared of the maintenance, or they've got some sort of fatal flaw with the powertrain that everybody's scared of. But not with the Aston Martins. They're good cars. I mean, you know, clutches don't last forever and are admittedly expensive. But you know, you have a lot of control over how frequently you replace that with the way you drive. And the car is fully depreciated, and you know, like I said, the owner of this car isn't likely to put a lot of kilometers on it, so you can put this thing in your garage and take it out on nice days, and with a $50,000 investment. So, I mean, you know, it makes it one of the least expensive cars in the showroom right now. Okay, so with that, Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and the Lugnuts facility. You can send me an email if you're interested in buying this car. And please like and subscribe, and we'll keep these videos coming. Thank you.